The pen scratched across paper in the quiet study. Abu Jihad leaned over his desk, reviewing coordination documents for the intifada operations scheduled for the coming week. Outside his window in Sidi Bou Said, the Mediterranean night was still and dark. It was 1:15 in the morning on April 16th, 1988. He didn't hear the phone line being cut outside. He didn't hear the security dog's muffled whimper as it was neutralized. He didn't hear the villa's front door being breached with mechanical precision, the lock mechanism disengaging without a sound loud enough to wake his sleeping children. What he heard finally was footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots, multiple sets, moving with purpose toward the second floor where he sat working. Abu Jihad looked up from his papers. His hand moved instinctively toward the desk drawer where he kept his pistol, but the door to his study was already opening. The suppressed weapons came up first, followed by the commandos holding them. They'd traveled 1,500 miles from Israeli territory for this moment. They'd rehearsed the assault dozens of times in a full-scale replica of this exact room. The first shot hit him in the chest. Before we find out what happened in those final seconds, I want to let you know what this channel is all about. Every single day, I bring you real intelligence operations. Not Hollywood fiction, but actual missions with genuine tradecraft and the human cost that never makes the headlines. If you're fascinated by the world of espionage, the moral calculations that intelligence officers face, and the operations that changed history, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What you're about to hear is one of the most precisely executed assassinations in modern intelligence history, and the story gets more complex with every detail. And real quick before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. Drop a comment below with your city and country. Are you in New York, Tel Aviv, London, Tunis? It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach across the globe. Let me know where this operation story is finding you today. Now, back to that study in Sidi Bou Said, and the man Israel had decided absolutely had to die. To understand why 8 Israeli commandos were climbing the stairs of a villa in Tunisia at 1:15 in the morning, you need to understand who Abu Jihad was and what he'd built. His real name was Khalil al-Wazir, but everyone in the intelligence world knew him by his nom de guerre, Abu Jihad, father of the struggle. He wasn't just another mid-level operative in Yasser Arafat's PLO. He was the PLO's deputy chief of staff and Fatah's primary military strategist, the man who turned Arafat's political rhetoric into operational violence. The Israelis had been tracking him for over a decade, watching his fingerprints appear on attack after attack. March 1975, the Savoy Hotel raid in Tel Aviv. Palestinian operatives seized the hotel and took hostages. By the time Israeli forces stormed the building, 8 hostages were dead along with 3 soldiers. Abu Jihad had planned every detail of that operation from Beirut, selecting the target and coordinating the assault team's infiltration from the sea. 3 years later came the Coastal Road massacre, and this one made Abu Jihad's name a priority target for Israeli intelligence. March 11, 1978. 13 Fatah operatives landed on the Israeli coast north of Tel Aviv. They hijacked a bus filled with civilians and opened fire as Israeli forces tried to stop them. When the shooting ended, 37 Israelis were dead. 13 of them were children. Abu Jihad had conceived the operation, selected the landing point, and provided the operational training that made it possible. Israeli intelligence officers studied the attack's planning and recognized something that made Abu Jihad particularly dangerous. He wasn't just ordering attacks, he was thinking strategically about how to maximize psychological impact, how to strike targets that would generate the most fear and political pressure. He understood that terrorism wasn't just about body counts. It was about creating sustained terror that eroded public confidence in the government's ability to protect its citizens. By 1987, Abu Jihad had evolved into something even more threatening. The first intifada erupted in December of that year, and while it began as spontaneous Palestinian uprising against Israeli occupation, Abu Jihad quickly became its primary external coordinator. From his headquarters in Tunis, 1,500 miles from Israeli territory, he organized funding networks, smuggled weapons into the occupied territories, and coordinated the actions of various Palestinian factions. Israeli intelligence intercepted his communications and watched his influence grow. He was turning scattered protests into organized resistance. The Israeli cabinet faced a strategic calculation. Abu Jihad was operating from Tunisia, a sovereign nation with no shared border with Israel. Reaching him would require a deep penetration operation with massive political risk. But his effectiveness was undeniable. Intelligence assessments showed him directing operations that were killing Israeli soldiers and civilians with increasing frequency. His organizational skills had made him Arafat's indispensable deputy, the man who translated political objectives into military action. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir reviewed the intelligence and made his decision. Abu Jihad had to be eliminated. Not arrested, eliminated. The operation would send a message that Israeli reach extended far beyond its borders, that planning attacks from distant capitals wouldn't provide safety, that the men who ordered violence against Israeli civilians would pay the price regardless of where they hid. Mossad received the initial authorization sometime in late 1987. The mandate was clear, but the challenge was enormous. Tunisia wasn't a war zone where Israeli forces operated openly. It was a relatively stable North African nation with its own security services, its own laws, and its own relationship with the international community. Running an assassination operation there meant building an entire intelligence infrastructure from scratch. Surveillance networks, safe houses, cover identities, extraction protocols. Everything would need to be created without alerting Tunisian intelligence or the PLO security teams protecting their leadership. The operation's complexity multiplied when planners recognized they weren't just killing a man. They were killing a man who lived with his wife and children in a residential neighborhood, surrounded by civilians who had nothing to do with the conflict. The hit would need surgical precision, no collateral casualties, no innocent blood that could turn the operation into a propaganda disaster. Just Abu Jihad, eliminated in his home, with his family left physically unharmed even as they witnessed the violence. Israeli military intelligence worked with Mossad to develop the operational plan. They'd need three distinct elements working in coordination. First, a long-term surveillance operation to map Abu Jihad's routines and security protocols. Second, a maritime infiltration capability to get the assault team into Tunisia and extract them before Tunisian forces could respond. Third, a deception layer to delay and confuse local security during the critical minutes when the commandos would be most vulnerable. The planners selected Sayeret Matkal for the actual assault. Israel's premier special operations unit had the training and experience for close-quarters combat in residential settings. Sayeret 13, the naval commandos, would handle the maritime infiltration and extraction. Mossad would provide the surveillance infrastructure, the deception operations, and the local intelligence that would make everything else possible. But all of that was theoretical until they could answer one fundamental question. When was Abu Jihad most vulnerable? The answer to that question would take months at least to find, and it would require Mossad operatives to do something they excelled at, becoming invisible in plain sight. Mossad's advance team began entering Tunisia in late 1987, each operative arriving separately with carefully crafted cover identities. One came as a German tourist interested in North African architecture. Another posed as a French NGO worker evaluating development projects. A third arrived as a Belgian business consultant exploring investment opportunities in Tunisia's growing textile sector. Their passports were genuine documents from their cover countries, created through Mossad's sophisticated forgery networks. Their cover stories had enough depth to survive casual scrutiny, real hotel reservations, verifiable business contacts, documented travel histories that placed them in multiple countries before Tunisia. The operational objective was straightforward: find Abu Jihad's residence, establish surveillance, and map every detail of his life until they understood his routines well enough to predict his movements days in advance. The challenge was doing all of this without triggering any alarms from Tunisian security services or the PLO's own protective details. The breakthrough came when a Mossad operative identified an apartment for rent directly across from Abu Jihad's villa in the Sidi Bou Said district. The location was perfect, elevated enough to provide clear sightlines into the villa's windows, close enough to observe details, but not so close that the surveillance itself would seem suspicious. The operative who secured the apartment used a Belgian passport and a cover story about being a freelance writer working on a book about Mediterranean culture. He signed a 6-month lease, paid in cash, and moved in with camera equipment hidden inside tourist luggage. The surveillance operation that followed was meticulous and patient. Every morning, the observation post logged what time lights came on in different rooms. Every evening, they noted when Abu Jihad returned home and which rooms he occupied. They tracked the guard rotation schedule. 2 men during the day, 1 at night, the shift change occurring at 6 in the evening and 6 in the morning. They documented the security dog's behavior, noting when it was walked and where it spent most of its time in the compound. Most importantly, they identified Abu Jihad's work pattern. He was a night owl, often staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning working in his second-floor study. The light in that room became the surveillance team's most reliable indicator of his location and activity. They recorded video footage showing him at his desk, surrounded by papers and maps, coordinating the intifada operations that were his primary focus. One of the Mossad operatives took the cover story to an extreme level that demonstrated the agency's commitment to authenticity. He arrived in Tunis posing as a European man on an extended honeymoon. He brought a female operative who posed as his new wife, and together they played the role of newlyweds exploring North Africa. They stayed in a hotel, visited tourist sites, ate at local restaurants, and behaved exactly like any other couple on a romantic adventure. But their real purpose was to maintain a constant, rotating presence near Abu Jihad's neighborhood without attracting attention. A couple on honeymoon could linger in cafes, take walks at odd hours, and generally exist in public spaces without raising suspicion. The surveillance footage accumulated over weeks and months. Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv reviewed every frame, looking for patterns and vulnerabilities. They noted that Abu Jihad's security was surprisingly light for a man of his importance. The villa had guards, but they weren't particularly alert. The physical security measures were basic: locks on the doors, a perimeter fence, the dog. Nothing that would stop a professional assault team with proper preparation. The most valuable discovery came from watching Abu Jihad's late-night work sessions. Between 1 and 2 in the morning, he was almost always alone in his study. His wife and children were asleep. The guard was often drowsy or distracted. The neighborhood was quiet. Those 60 minutes represented a vulnerability window that Israeli planners could exploit. Back in Israel, military engineers constructed something remarkable: a full-scale replica of Abu Jihad's villa based on the surveillance footage and measurements taken from multiple angles. They built it in a secure location where Sayeret Matkal could rehearse the assault without anyone outside the operation knowing what they were preparing for. The replica included every detail the surveillance team had documented: the layout of the rooms, the position of the furniture, the location of the stairs, even the height of the fence surrounding the property. The assault team ran through the operation again and again, refining their approach with each rehearsal. They practiced breaching the door silently, moving through the ground floor without making noise that would wake the family, climbing the stairs in formation, and entering the study with weapons ready. They timed every movement, looking for ways to shave seconds off their execution. The target time was 3 minutes from breach to withdrawal. Any longer, and they risked encountering response from Tunisian security forces or PLO reinforcements. By early April 1988, the surveillance team in Tunis had logged thousands of hours of observation. They documented Abu Jihad's schedule with enough precision to predict his movements days in advance. They knew which nights he worked late and which nights he went to bed early. They knew when his wife went shopping and when his children came home from school. They'd mapped the neighborhood's traffic patterns, identified the nearest police station, and timed the likely response if someone reported gunfire. On April 10th, the surveillance team noticed something significant. Abu Jihad was spending even more time than usual in his study, working through the night on what appeared to be urgent coordination for intifada operations. The increased activity suggested he was planning something major, which gave Israeli planners additional justification for moving quickly. Whatever he was organizing, it wouldn't happen if he was eliminated in the next few days. The final operational briefing took place in Tel Aviv on April 14th. Mossad's station chief for the operation laid out the current intelligence picture. Abu Jihad's routine remained consistent. The surveillance post had clear eyes on the villa. The support teams in Tunis were in position with their cover stories intact. Weather forecasts for the Mediterranean showed calm seas, ideal conditions for the naval infiltration. Tunisian security forces showed no signs of heightened alert. Prime Minister Shamir gave the final authorization. The operation would proceed on the night of April 15th, with the assault timed for the early morning hours of April 16th, when Abu Jihad would be working in his study. The naval task force departed from Israeli waters on April 15th, moving northwest toward Tunisia under the cover of a routine patrol. The vessels maintained normal radio traffic and navigation patterns until they approached Tunisian territorial waters, at which point they went dark. No radio transmissions, no active radar, engines throttled down to reduce acoustic signature. By 11:30 that night, they were holding position about 10 kilometers off the Tunisian coast, far enough to remain outside territorial waters, but close enough for the Zodiac boats to reach shore within the operational timeline. At 12:15 in the morning on April 16th, 8 Sayeret 13 commandos climbed into 2 Zodiac inflatable boats and pushed off from the mothership. The Mediterranean was calm, the moon obscured by thin clouds. The Zodiac's engines ran at low throttle to minimize noise as they moved towards the Tunisian coastline. Each commando carried suppressed weapons, communications equipment, and enough ammunition for a sustained firefight if the operation went wrong and they needed to fight their way back to the extraction point. While the naval infiltration was underway, Mossad's ground teams in Tunis were moving into their positions. This was where the operation's deception layer became critical. Israeli intelligence needed to buy time for the assault team to reach the villa, complete the hit, and extract to the beach before Tunisian security forces could respond effectively. The deception plan was elegant and audacious. Mossad operatives would pose as Tunisian police and security personnel, creating fake checkpoints and roadblocks that would delay actual Tunisian forces when they tried to respond to reports of gunfire. The operatives had obtained genuine Tunisian police uniforms through a procurement network that Mossad had spent months developing. They had vehicles that matched Tunisian police specifications, complete with the correct markings and equipment. To a casual observer, or even to a genuine Tunisian officer encountering them at a distance, they would appear completely legitimate. At 12:45 in the morning, a Mossad operative driving a vehicle marked as a telephone maintenance truck pulled up near Abu Jihad's villa. The truck had Tunisian State Telecommunications Company logos on the sides and carried equipment that looked exactly like what a legitimate repair crew would use. The operative got out, opened the back of the truck, and began working on a junction box that controlled phone service to the neighborhood. To anyone watching, he was just a maintenance worker dealing with a service issue. In reality, he was preparing to cut the phone lines that would prevent Abu Jihad or his guards from calling for help. 2 more Mossad operatives in a sedan positioned themselves at an intersection 3 blocks from the villa. They wore plain clothes, but carried identification that identified them as Tunisian internal security officers. Their job was to intercept any civilian vehicles that might stumble into the operational area during the critical minutes of the assault and extraction. They had the authority, or at least the appearance of authority, to redirect traffic and keep curious civilians away from the villa. The most sophisticated element of the deception was something the Tunisian government wouldn't discover until after the operation was over. The assault team was carrying an Israeli-made communications jammer, a piece of electronic warfare equipment that could block radio frequencies within a 1-kilometer radius. When activated, the jammer would prevent Tunisian police and security forces from coordinating their response using radios. They'd have to fall back on phone lines, which Mossad was about to cut, or send runners to physically deliver messages, which would burn precious minutes. At 1:05 in the morning, the Zodiacs reached the Tunisian coastline. The commandos had selected a quiet stretch of beach away from populated areas, a location that the surveillance team had identified as having minimal civilian activity even during daytime. At this hour, it was completely deserted. The Zodiac's bows scraped against sand, and the commandos stepped out into shallow water, pulling the boats onto the beach and securing them for the extraction that would happen in less than 30 minutes. The assault team split into 2 groups for the movement inland. 4 commandos took a direct route toward the villa, moving through back streets and staying in shadows. The other 4 took a parallel route that would bring them to the villa's perimeter from a different angle, providing backup and covering the primary team's approach. They moved quickly but carefully, weapons held in low ready positions, eyes scanning for any sign that their infiltration had been detected. At 1:12 in the morning, the assault team reached the villa's perimeter. The guard was standing outside the main entrance, smoking a cigarette. This was the moment the operation could go wrong. If the guard was alert and well-trained, he might notice the commandos approaching and raise an alarm before they could neutralize him. If he managed to fire his weapon or shout a warning, the entire neighborhood would wake up and the assault team would be conducting their hit with potential witnesses watching from windows. The commandos didn't give him the chance. 2 team members moved in from different angles, their suppressed pistols aimed at the guard's center mass. The first shot hit him in the chest before he even registered that something was wrong. He dropped his cigarette and collapsed, dead before his body hit the ground. The suppressed weapon made a sound like a heavy book being dropped on a table, noticeable if you were standing close by, but not loud enough to wake anyone sleeping inside the villa or in neighboring houses. Simultaneously, another commando moved toward the security dog. The surveillance team had documented the dog's routine. It typically stayed in a kennel near the villa's rear entrance, but sometimes wandered the compound during the night. Tonight, it was in its kennel, and the commando neutralized it with the same clinical efficiency that had killed the guard. The operation required silence and speed. Every potential source of alarm needed to be eliminated before the assault team entered the villa itself. The operative in the telephone maintenance truck chose this moment to cut the phone lines. He'd been watching the villa through binoculars, waiting for the signal from the assault team. When he saw them reach the perimeter, he disconnected the junction box circuits that provided service to Abu Jihad's villa and the surrounding houses. If anyone tried to pick up a phone in the next 30 minutes, they'd hear nothing but dead air. At 1:14 in the morning, the assault team reached the villa's front door. They'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times in the replica back in Israel. The door had a standard lock mechanism, nothing sophisticated enough to require explosives or loud forced entry techniques. One of the commandos used a mechanical lockpick, working quickly while the rest of the team covered him with weapons raised. The lock disengaged with a soft click. The door swung open. They were inside. The ground floor of the villa was dark and quiet. The assault team moved through it in formation, each commando covering a different sector with overlapping fields of fire. Their night vision equipment turned the darkness into shades of green, revealing furniture, doorways, and the staircase leading to the second floor. They knew from the surveillance footage that Abu Jihad's children were sleeping in rooms on the ground floor. The team's rules of engagement were absolute: no harm to the family unless they directly interfered with the mission. The commandos moved past the children's rooms without pausing, focusing on their primary objective, the second-floor study where their target was working. The stairs creaked slightly under their weight. This was unavoidable. The surveillance team had noted this detail during their months of observation, and the assault team knew they had to accept the risk. If Abu Jihad heard the creaking and became suspicious, the commandos would need to move faster than planned. But speed without precision could lead to mistakes, and mistakes in a residential hit could mean killing civilians. Abu Jihad heard the footsteps. He looked up from his papers, his expression shifting from concentration to confusion to alarm as he processed what he was hearing. Heavy boots on his stairs at 1:15 in the morning. Multiple people, moving purposefully toward his study. His hand moved toward the desk drawer where he kept his personal weapon, but he was already too late. The men who'd traveled 1,500 miles to kill him had trained for months to execute this moment in under 3 seconds from door breach to confirmed kill. The door to his study burst open. 3 commandos entered simultaneously, their suppressed weapons tracking toward the man sitting at the desk. Abu Jihad's hand was still reaching for the drawer when the first shot hit him in the chest. The suppressed pistol's sound was muffled, but not silent, a sharp crack that echoed in the small room. Abu Jihad jerked backward in his chair, his coordination documents scattering across the desk. The commandos moved closer, firing additional shots to ensure their target was incapacitated and wouldn't be able to fight back or trigger any alarms. The suppressed weapons kept firing, each shot placed with the precision that came from hundreds of hours of training. Abu Jihad slumped in his chair, mortally wounded, his blood spreading across the intifada planning documents he'd been reviewing moments before. His wife had heard the commotion. She appeared in the hallway outside the study, drawn by the sounds of violence in her home. She saw the commandos, saw her husband dying in his chair, and froze. The commandos turned their weapons toward her but didn't fire. Their rules of engagement held. She wasn't the target. She wasn't armed. She wasn't interfering with the mission. One of the commandos made a sharp hand gesture, indicating she should stay back and remain silent. She complied, too shocked and terrified to do anything else. The assault team leader moved close to Abu Jihad and checked for vital signs. No pulse, no breathing. The target was confirmed dead. The entire assault from door breach to confirmation had taken less than 2 minutes. Now came the most dangerous part of the operation, the withdrawal and extraction, while Tunisian security forces were mobilizing somewhere in the night, confused by cut phone lines and jammed radio frequencies, but beginning to understand that something catastrophic had just happened. The commandos moved back through the villa, retracing their entry route. They passed Abu Jihad's wife, who remained frozen in the hallway, and descended the stairs to the ground floor. The children's rooms remained quiet. Either they'd slept through the suppressed weapons fire, or they were too frightened to leave their rooms. Either way, the assault team had accomplished their mission without killing or injuring any family members. The only casualties were the target, the guard, and the security dog, exactly what the operational plan had specified. Outside, the Mossad perimeter teams were beginning their own withdrawal. The operative in the telephone maintenance truck packed up his equipment and drove away, taking a route that would lead him through a series of safe houses before he eventually left Tunisia on a commercial flight with a European passport that bore no connection to the operation. The 2 operatives posing as internal security officers dissolved their fake checkpoint and separated, each heading to different safe locations where they'd lay low until they could safely extract from the country. The fake Tunisian police vehicles that had been positioned at strategic intersections also began to scatter. These operatives had been holding positions to delay actual Tunisian security forces if they'd tried to approach the villa during the assault, but with the hit complete and the assault team withdrawing, their mission was finished. They drove off in different directions, some heading to safe houses in Tunis, others driving to other cities where they'd abandon the vehicles and assume new cover identities. At 1:17 in the morning, exactly 3 minutes after entering the villa, the assault team was back outside and moving toward their extraction point. They moved quickly through the dark streets, weapons held ready in case they encountered Tunisian security patrols. The communications jammer was still active, preventing local police from coordinating their response, but the window of protection it provided was limited. The jammer's battery wouldn't last forever, and even with cut phone lines and blocked radio frequencies, Tunisian forces would eventually figure out what was happening and converge on the area. The commandos reached the beach at 1:25 in the morning. The Zodiacs were exactly where they'd been left, secured on the sand and ready for immediate launch. The team pushed the boats into the water and started the engines, no longer worried about noise discipline now that the hit was complete, and speed was more important than stealth. The Zodiacs accelerated away from the Tunisian coast, engines at full throttle, racing toward the mothership waiting in international waters. Behind them, Tunis was beginning to wake up to the reality of what had just happened. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Tunisian police finally arrived at Abu Jihad's villa. The response had been delayed by exactly what Israeli planners had anticipated: cut phone lines, jammed radio frequencies, and fake checkpoints that had confused and redirected the first responders. By the time actual Tunisian security forces reached the scene, the assault team was already 5 kilometers offshore and accelerating toward safety. The police found Abu Jihad's body still in his study chair, surrounded by the intifada coordination documents he'd been working on when the commandos burst through his door. His wife was in shock, barely able to answer questions about what she'd witnessed. The guard's body was outside, the security dog dead in its kennel. The whole scene spoke to professional execution, a military-style hit conducted with precision and speed that suggested extensive planning and training. Within an hour, word of the assassination was spreading through PLO networks. Someone had killed Abu Jihad, the PLO's deputy chief of staff and Fatah's military strategist, in his home in Tunis. The operation had penetrated 1,500 miles from Israeli territory, breached whatever security measures were supposed to protect PLO leadership in exile, and executed the hit without being caught or leaving anyone alive who could identify the attackers with certainty. Yasser Arafat received the news before dawn and immediately accused Israel of the assassination. He was correct, of course, but Israel had built enough operational ambiguity into the hit that official denial would remain plausible for years. There were no captured commandos to interrogate, no abandoned equipment marked with Israeli military serial numbers, no witnesses who could positively identify the attackers as Israeli special forces. Just a professionally executed assassination that bore all the hallmarks of Israeli intelligence operations, but couldn't be definitively proven. I have to pause here and ask you something. Abu Jihad planned operations that killed dozens of Israeli civilians, including children. The Coastal Road Massacre, the Savoy Hotel attack. These weren't military targets. They were deliberate strikes against civilians designed to create terror. But Israel's response was to send commandos into his home and kill him while his wife watched and his children slept nearby. If you were making this decision, knowing what Abu Jihad had done and what he was actively planning, would you have authorized this operation? Would you have accepted the moral weight of killing a man in front of his family, even if that man was responsible for killing families himself? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious where you stand on this impossible moral calculation, because what happened next shows that even successful operations create complications that planners can't always predict. At 1:50 in the morning, the Zodiacs reached the Israeli naval vessels waiting in international waters. The commandos climbed aboard, bringing their weapons and equipment with them. The Zodiacs were deflated and stowed, eliminating evidence that might be recovered if Tunisian naval forces came searching. The mothership's engines engaged, and the vessel began moving away from Tunisian waters, increasing speed as it put distance between itself and the operation site. The sun rose on April 16, 1988, and Tunisia woke to the reality that one of the most significant figures in the Palestinian liberation movement had been assassinated in the heart of their capital. For the Tunisian government, the operation was a humiliating security failure. PLO leadership had been living in Tunis under Tunisian protection since being forced out of Lebanon in 1982. Tunisia had assured Arafat and other PLO officials that they would be safe on Tunisian soil. Now, Abu Jihad was dead, killed in a raid that had penetrated Tunisian territory without being detected until it was too late to stop. Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali ordered an immediate investigation into the security failures that had allowed the operation to succeed. How had Israeli intelligence established surveillance networks in Tunis without being detected? How had the assault team infiltrated by sea without Tunisian naval forces noticing? How had communications been jammed and phone lines cut without triggering immediate alerts? The investigation would reveal a cascade of security gaps, but the damage was already done. Tunisia's reputation as a safe haven for PLO leadership had been shattered. For the PLO, the assassination created both operational crisis and symbolic opportunity. Operationally, Abu Jihad's death left a massive gap in Fatah's military structure. He'd been the primary coordinator of armed operations against Israel, the man who maintained contact networks, funding channels, and operational planning for attacks that ranged from West Bank intifada actions to international terrorism. Finding someone with his experience, connections, and organizational capability would take years. The immediate effect was disruption of planned operations and confusion among field operatives who'd lost their primary contact point. But symbolically, Abu Jihad's assassination transformed him into something Israeli planners hadn't fully anticipated, a martyr whose death would inspire the very resistance they'd tried to suppress. His funeral in Tunis drew tens of thousands of Palestinians and Arabs from across the region. The man who'd planned violence against Israeli civilians was now being celebrated as a hero who'd sacrificed his life for Palestinian liberation. His image appeared on posters throughout the occupied territories. Palestinian children were named after him. The intifada that he'd helped coordinate intensified rather than diminished after his death. Israeli intelligence officers analyzing the operation's aftermath recognized the paradox they'd created. Tactically, the mission was a complete success. They'd eliminated a high-value target with surgical precision, extracted the assault team without casualties, and maintained enough operational security that official Israeli involvement could be denied for decades. The tradecraft had been flawless. The surveillance operation, the deception layers, the assault execution, the extraction. Everything had worked exactly as planned. Strategically, though, the calculation was more complicated. Abu Jihad's death did disrupt PLO operations, at least temporarily. Israeli intelligence intercepted communications showing confusion and disarray among Palestinian operatives who'd lost their primary coordinator. Planned attacks were delayed or canceled because the organizational structure that Abu Jihad had built couldn't function smoothly without him. In that narrow sense, the operation achieved its objective. But the martyrdom effect was real and significant. Abu Jihad became a symbol that transcended his actual operational role. Palestinians who might not have known his name before the assassination now saw him as a fallen hero, killed by Israeli commandos in his home in front of his family. The image was powerful, and it fed into the narrative of Palestinian resistance against overwhelming Israeli military superiority. Intifada violence didn't decrease after April 16th. In many areas, it intensified, fueled by rage over Abu Jihad's assassination. Israeli leadership defended the operation publicly while maintaining official ambiguity about their involvement. Prime Minister Shamir, when asked about the assassination, neither confirmed nor denied Israeli responsibility. The standard formulation was, "We do not comment on intelligence operations." This strategic ambiguity served multiple purposes. It allowed Israel to claim credit within intelligence circles while maintaining plausible deniability in international forums, where the assassination of a political figure on foreign soil would be condemned. The truth was that everyone involved in Middle Eastern politics knew Israel had conducted the operation. The tradecraft was too sophisticated to be anyone else. The precision matched previous Israeli special operations. The target selection aligned perfectly with Israeli intelligence priorities. But without definitive proof, no captured commandos, no recovered equipment with Israeli markings, no witnesses who could identify the attackers with certainty, the international community couldn't definitively assign blame, which gave Israel diplomatic cover even as their intelligence reputation was enhanced. For Tunisia, the fallout was severe and lasting. President Ben Ali's government conducted extensive security reforms, upgrading protection for foreign dignitaries, and improving coordination between different security services. But the damage to Tunisia's image as a safe haven was permanent. Other PLO officials who'd felt secure living in Tunis began to reconsider their security arrangements. Some relocated to other countries, others increased their personal security details and changed their routines to make themselves harder targets. The operation also demonstrated something that changed regional security calculations. Israel had proven it could reach targets 1,500 miles from its borders, conduct complex multi-phase operations requiring months of planning and preparation, and extract assault teams successfully before local security forces could respond. This wasn't a drone strike or a long-range missile attack. This was boots on the ground, eyes on target, a surgical assassination that required infiltrating a foreign country and operating in its capital without being detected until the mission was complete. For intelligence services throughout the Middle East and beyond, the Tunis raid became a case study in operational planning and execution. The surveillance phase demonstrated patience and attention to detail. The deception layers showed creative thinking about how to delay response forces. The assault itself was textbook close-quarters combat, fast, violent, and precise. The extraction planning ensured the team could get out before being trapped. Every phase of the operation reflected professional tradecraft at the highest level. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this deep dive into one of the most precisely executed intelligence operations of the 1980s. This channel is dedicated to bringing you real spy stories every single day, operations that shaped history, tradecraft that changed the game, and the human cost behind every mission. These aren't Hollywood fantasies. These are actual operations planned by real intelligence officers and executed by commandos who knew the risks they were taking. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Hit that button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. We've got dozens more operations to cover, from Cold War spy swaps to modern cyber warfare, and each one reveals something essential about how intelligence services operate in the shadows. So, what do you think? Was this operation justified given Abu Jihad's role in planning attacks against Israeli civilians? Could it have been handled differently? Arrest, diplomatic pressure, something other than assassination? And what about the strategic outcome? Did the tactical success justify the martyrdom effect that followed? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to hear different perspectives on these operations that exist in the moral gray zones of international conflict. The villa in Sidi Bou Said still stands today, converted into a memorial for Abu Jihad. Visitors can walk through the rooms where he lived and worked, see the study where he was killed, and reflect on the operation that ended his life. For Palestinians, it's a shrine to a martyr. For Israelis, it's evidence of their intelligence services' capability to reach anyone, anywhere, who poses a threat to their national security. The commandos who conducted the raid returned to Israel as heroes within their units, though their identities and specific roles remained classified for decades. Some eventually left military service and moved into private security or business. Others continued in special operations, participating in subsequent missions that would never be publicly acknowledged. They'd proven they could execute the most difficult kind of operation, a deep penetration assassination on foreign soil, and return home without losses. Abu Jihad's legacy remains contested and complicated. To Palestinians, he's remembered as a freedom fighter who dedicated his life to resisting Israeli occupation, a strategist who organized resistance against overwhelming military superiority, a leader who paid the ultimate price for his commitment to Palestinian liberation. To Israelis, he's remembered as a terrorist who planned attacks against civilians, a man responsible for the deaths of dozens of innocents, including children, a legitimate military target whose elimination was both justified and necessary. The operation that killed him sits in that same contested space. Was it a legitimate counterterrorism strike against a man actively planning violence against civilians? Or was it an extrajudicial assassination that violated international law and Tunisian sovereignty? The answer depends on which side of the conflict you view it from, and more than 30 years later, there's still no consensus. What's undeniable is the operation's impact on intelligence doctrine. The Tunis raid proved that with sufficient planning, patience, and precision, special operations forces could conduct surgical strikes at extreme range, penetrate hostile or neutral territory, eliminate high-value targets, and extract successfully. The lessons learned from Abu Jihad's assassination influenced operations for decades afterward, shaping how intelligence services approached target selection, surveillance methodologies, deception operations, and assault planning. For the men who planned and executed the mission, the moral weight was something they'd carry for the rest of their lives. They'd killed a man in his home, in front of his wife, while his children slept nearby. They'd done it because they believed Abu Jihad posed an ongoing threat to Israeli civilians, that his operational planning would lead to more deaths if he wasn't stopped. Whether that justification is sufficient is a question each of them had to answer for themselves. The Mediterranean night that had been so still and quiet when the operation began was calm again within hours. The Zodiacs had vanished back to their mothership. The fake Tunisian police had dissolved into safe houses and cover identities. The surveillance post across from the villa was abandoned, its months of video footage already analyzed and archived in Tel Aviv. All that remained was Abu Jihad's body, the traumatized family he'd left behind, and the complicated legacy of a man who'd been both freedom fighter and terrorist, depending on who was telling his story.